What about then the idea of printing? I mean, so much of our photography now is sort of disposable, put onto a digital format. And yet, I mean, I remember, first of all, when they used to say, well, look, you've put it on digital, this will now survive forever. And yet, so it was put on floppy disks, but you can't even use it. So they're put on CDs and DVDs, but how many computers even have a CD player anymore? And so now it's stored somewhere on the cloud, but something gets hacked or there's something and it goes, and these digital images disappear forever. What about printing? Should we be printing more of our photos? Or maybe perhaps curating our photos and at least printing the best ones?
I think that's an important question. Because what that really, there's that question from a moment to moment, day to day perspective, but there's that question also in terms of digital preservation. How do we ensure that these images are preserved digitally as well? And of course, printing is I think, an important aspect of photography that we do lose a bit when we experience everything on a screen, because we do associate things that we witness on a screen to be transitory, right? We move on to the next thing, but a print, you can hold it in your hand, even if it's stored in a box under your bed. You can pull that box out, at your leisure and open it up and look at the photograph, which is exactly what Murray MacKinnon did with his collection. They weren't under the bed. They were actually quite professionally stored and archivally stored, for that matter. He was very wise about that. But when he had a moment in which he just wanted to sit down and look at all of his the photographs in his collection of transport, that's the way he had them organized. And I think in a sense that's brilliant in terms of how we might organize our own images. I do think there's great significance to that sort of physical object that you can hold and you can see in different kinds of light at different times of day, that you can look at over a duration in which you're approaching it from different times in your life, different moods. It means different things to you at different points. And there's no better way to really give yourself the time to experience that than to hold a print in your hands.
I think you're right. I think there is something so different. I mean, I know this as a professional photographer, where a lot of what I photograph, or most of what I photograph really is for somebody else. And most of it gets, when I do a photo shoot for a client, I then send them the digital files. I very rarely actually see my work printed up, but sometimes I do. Perhaps I've done a piece for a magazine, and then I get a copy of the magazine and I look at the photos, and there they are in print on a piece of paper. And it's almost like looking at somebody else's photo. I know these photos so well. I've gone in and I have manipulated every single pixel to polish it up to make sure that the right bit is in the right place, that it's all edited to the level it needs to be edited to appear in a magazine. But it has a life of its own once it's printed in a way that is different to the digital. It feels like I will spend more time looking at it, whereas on a screen, we're in that kind of Instagram mode, scroll past. Our attention span for a digital image is a handful of seconds, maybe not half a second, a fraction of a second, maybe 1 second, maybe two, maybe long enough for us to just click like, or even write a little "great to see you up and about again," or "no, I hated my coffee at that place too," or whatever it else. And that's about as much attention as we give it. But a printed piece, we spend longer looking at it. And I suppose there's an extension of that, which is what happens when you put it in a frame and stick it on the wall. Then we have a sense of it being art. We're now told that by framing it, it is important. And so we can't help but spend more time looking at it, feeling that it is worth the attention of several seconds, maybe even a few minutes, maybe longer, maybe worth revisiting and coming back and looking at again. Whereas on a Facebook feed or an Instagram feed, mentally it's just placed on an instant and disposable. I've seen it, I've scrolled past it, it's forgotten.
And another way to do that is, what I'm cataloging right now in the MacKinnon Collection are the 19th, early 20th century photographic albums. And I think that's a wonderful way to experience photographs, and would encourage, folks to step back in time. If you once you're able to get out in the world again and travel, and you make hundreds of photographs or thousands of photographs from your journey, print them out, put them in an album. And even if that album lives on your bookshelves for most of its time, there are going to be those moments in which you walk by and you think, I'm going to pull this out and just take a few minutes with it. I think that I would suggest there are very few times that one regrets that activity, because they're wonderful, not just memories, but sort of new discoveries that you find every time.
Yeah, I think that's true. There's also that notion of the passing on to the next generations. Once we were past once we'd all kind of had our first round of vaccines or second round of vaccines, I finally got down to see my father, who I'd not seen for nearly 2 years. And when I saw him, he, I also, while I was there, picked up one of the old family albums that we have of photos that go from when my parents were sort of just after they were married through to when I was about 10 years old or thereabouts. So it covers a particular, and it's one of these things where I know those photos so well from as a child, looking at them again and again, but I haven't seen them for decades. And but being able to then show my daughter these photos of what daddy was like when he was a kid, of what grandparents were like when they were young, and even who my grandparents, who in fact actually who died when I was only 2 or 3, so I don't really have any memory of them. I only have memories of them through the photos. And interestingly, I always love, there's a particular photo of my grandfather and my father's mother and father, and you've got this little old couple. And they are old, they are really old. They are kind of sort of sitting there in clothes that are too big for them because they sort of shrunk into them. And they've got no, false teeth have come out. So, the jaw is kind of pushing up, and wrinkles to sort of, and you look at them and you think they must be, 140 years old at least, And then the date, you look at the date, and the date is something like 1963, 1964. And then you say, oh, hang on a sec, but they were born in like 1901, 1902. This really old couple are like 62 years old in these photos. I go, whoa, they, compared to modern 62-year-olds, these look like they're 30 years older. And it's, that sense of, is it just because of the way they're dressing? Is it that life was so much harder in those days? Is it that you kind of expected to get old and so started behaving older and dressing older and looking older? I remember my mother talking about some aunt of hers who, when she was 40 years old, decided she wouldn't go upstairs on a bus anymore. That there's an expectation which we don't have that, from baby boomers through Generation X and what have you. There hasn't been that expectation to grow old in the same way. We still kind of feel more or less like teenagers playing at grown-ups a lot. I know I'm shooting off on wild tangents here. I suppose really it's that notion of going back to the photo albums, being able to revisit, and that they have that sense of, you tap into them in a different way than looking at a digital photo. There is something about when, as you say, when you physically hold something there, it takes on a different level of importance.
And if you do go to the effort of making a photo album, write down who those people are.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because yes, I do have another photo album somewhere, which my dad has said, well, I think that was your uncle. So, but it's a bunch of people for whom I don't really know who any of them are. And anybody who would know who they are has got them now as well.
That's one of the beauties of the internet, is that, these days, a lot of these records are online, from the census to other kinds of family and civic records. So if you do have someone's name, you're able to trace various family lines and start to discover things about the communities in which people lived, and the sort of social circumstances that they were that were imposed upon them, and that they created for themselves as well.
Mm-hmm.